Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of Valencia, snow drifted down in soft, relentless waves, turning the city lights beyond the glass into streaks of watercolor amber, crimson, blurred and sorrowful. I pressed my palm against the cold pane, watching flakes melt and slip downward like the tears I no longer had the luxury to shed. My own reflection hovered faintly before me, a hollowed face, shadows blooming beneath green eyes that once sparkled with dreams, now dulled by exhaustion. Even the black dress I wore was not mine. Lily, my roommate, had lent it to me. It hung loosely on a body thinned by 3 months of skipping breakfast and slicing dinner portions to keep up with rent. I once had soft curves. Now there was nothing but bone and stubborn willpower. Table 9 needs water. Marcus, the night manager, snapped as he walked past without bothering to look at me. I was nothing here, just another invisible waitress swallowed whole by the city and spat back out as if I had never existed. I lifted the heavy crystal carafe, my hands trembling from cold and fatigue. Valencia hummed with the restrained elegance of polished cutlery against porcelain, hushed conversations, soft laughter from people who had never been forced to choose between paying the electric bill and eating. Valencia was not made for people like me. It catered to the powerful, to old dynasties, to names spoken only in whispers. And tonight, Table 9, hidden partly behind a lacquered screen painted with a magnificent golden phoenix, was marked off limits. "We have a special guest tonight," Marcus had warned, tension threading through his voice. "No one goes near that area." But water was still water, and tips were still tips. I turned, my worn heels clicking against the marble floor, each step a careful trespass into a different pocket of air. I had no way of knowing that in only a moment, everything I understood about my life would fracture. I had no way of knowing that the man seated at that table would pull me out of obscurity and hurl me straight into the vortex of power, danger, and a kind of love so consuming it left no room to breathe. If you are listening to this and feel something inside you stir, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel, like and share this video so we can continue bringing heartfelt stories to you every day. And if you do not mind, would you tell me where you are watching from? Leave a comment below and let us know which corner of the world this story has reached. We cherish every single message you share. I stepped around the screen, still gripping the carafe, and froze as if I had crossed an invisible boundary between reality and something I had no words for. At the table sat a single man, leaning back against the leather chair, one hand resting on the table, the other relaxed on his thigh, controlled, yet carelessly so. There were no other diners, no voices, no laughter. Only a stillness so profound it made my skin prickle, the air thickening around me. The chandelier's light glinted off the watch on his wrist, a silver Patek Philippe sharp as a blade. He lifted his head, and for a heartbeat, I forgot how to breathe. His dark hair was neatly combed back, each line of his face carved with stark precision, angular jaw, straight nose, lips pressed into a thin line. Not with anger, but with the unfamiliarity of letting himself soften. Yet it was his eyes that rooted me to the spot. Steel gray and shadowed, cold but searching. They looked at me as if I were something he had lost a very long time ago and had unexpectedly found again. Not surprised, not curious. As if he had known I would come. I had never seen a gaze like that. No words, no movement, and still his eyes held command and inquiry all at once. I did not belong here. The hand holding the carafe began to tremble, not from its weight but from the sheer presence of the man before me. He was unlike anyone I had ever encountered. Not handsome in the familiar way. Something in him carried the scent of power, of danger, of blood long dried and the eerie silence before a storm breaks. I swallowed hard, my lips dry as paper, and took a step closer, my heartbeat pounding like war drums. I'm sorry. Marcus said this table needed water. My voice splintered, so faint I barely recognized it as mine. He did not respond immediately. He simply watched me, tracing me from head to toe. There was no hunger in his expression, no ordinary evaluation. His stare felt like an assessment of how I existed, a reading of the unspoken thoughts behind my ribs. "You brought the water, pour it." His voice was low, cool, velvet lined with steel, not a request, not a suggestion, a command. I moved to pour the water into the crystal glass, trying not to let my shaking spill it. But a single drop escaped, darkening the pristine white tablecloth like a small circle of blood. My breath caught. I reached for a napkin, but before my fingers touched it, his hand closed around my wrist. Not tight, but firm, immovable. I looked up, and our eyes collided like a spark in heavy air. "You are trembling," he observed, his tone unchanged. "Why?" Panic clawed at me as I tried to form words, but my mind had gone blank. I'm just nervous. I did not know this was a restricted area. I should go." I stepped back, but his hand had not released me yet. Silence stretched a single second. Then he asked, "What is your name?" Such an ordinary question, yet it startled me more than anything else. No one asked my name here. No one cared. I had worked nearly 4 months, and to most customers, I was just the one who poured water, carried plates, wiped tables. "Grace," I breathed. "Grace Whitmore." He let go immediately, and I drew back as if escaping the touch of a predator. Yet strangely, I felt more unmoored than afraid. "Grace," he repeated, as though tasting the sound. A beautiful name. My throat tightened. I should leave. I needed to leave, but my feet refused to move, and in that suspended moment, I understood tonight would not end like any night before. Something had begun, and I had already stepped too far to turn back. I turned away, my palms still damp with cold and sweat, but I had taken only a few steps when his voice rose behind me, low and steady, pulling me to a halt like a taut string. "Sit down, Grace." I thought I had misheard him. Warnings blared in my mind. I was not allowed to sit with customers. I was not allowed anywhere near table 9. No one sat at that table except those invited. And yet I turned back, my gaze locking with eyes the color of early morning fog, depthless and filled with something both frightening and irresistibly magnetic. I walked slowly back toward the table, my heart pounding like a war drum in my chest, and as I pulled out the chair and lowered myself into the seat across from him, I knew every rule and every boundary had already been broken. A waitress did not sit down to eat with a patron. But I was no longer just a waitress. Not with this man. He lifted a hand in a brief gesture, and only a few seconds later, another server appeared, carrying a large silver tray that he set down gently between us. On it were 2 plates of steak, warm bread, a bottle of red wine already uncorked, and clear glassware that caught the light. No one asked what I wanted. No one asked whether I even wished to eat. Everything had been prepared as though my presence had been anticipated long before I arrived. Jack slid a plate toward me, a small movement executed with quiet authority. "Eat." I looked at him, hesitating, but my stomach ached with the familiar, deep hunger that had lived inside me for months, weaving itself into the shape of my body like breath. I picked up the knife and fork, trying to steady my hands as I cut the first piece. The steak was tender, perfectly cooked, juices slipping out in warm, brown-red trails laced with the scent of pepper and browned butter. I ate without speaking, without lifting my gaze, hearing nothing but the sound of my own chewing echoing too loudly in a space that felt impossibly vast. Jack ate slowly, calmly, as if he had all the time in the world, while I had only one fragile moment to exist. At some point, the wine in my glass had been poured full. I lifted it to my lips, taking a small sip, the dark red burning its way down my throat. I was not used to drinking, but refusal felt dangerous. The pressure in the air thickened like a fog that refused to lift. He did not need to raise his voice. He did not need to threaten. His presence alone made me fold inward, as if he were peeling back layers of me I had tried to keep hidden. "How long have you worked here, Grace?" The question startled me, simple yet anything but harmless. I swallowed my food and forced my voice into something steady. 4 months. I was still in college, but my mother passed away last year, so I left to work. I did not know why I suddenly mentioned my mother. Maybe I wanted to fill the silence. Maybe his eyes loosened something inside me. Jack nodded faintly, asking nothing more, only watching me for a few seconds before wiping the corner of his mouth with a napkin. I sat there trying to remain composed, feeling as if every part of me were under a microscope. I had no idea who he was, but I knew men like him did not enter my life by accident. He was not merely wealthy. He was the kind of man whose name people whispered. I could sense it in the way the staff bowed their heads around him, in Marcus's wary glances from afar, in the gravity that clung to him like a shadow no one could imitate. The meal ended in silence. I began to rise when he said, "You should not go home alone. The snow is getting heavier outside. I will have a car take you." I wanted to refuse. I truly did. but that voice left no room for resistance. It was silk wrapped around cold steel. I nodded as if the choice belonged to me, though somewhere deep inside I knew that, from the moment I approached Table 9, none of my choices had really been mine anymore. The black car waited outside Valencia, as if it had known the exact moment I would step out. The door swung open before I reached it. No driver emerging, no one urging me to hurry. I slipped into the back seat, and Jack followed a few seconds later, sitting beside me not too close, yet close enough to make the space around me shrink. The car glided forward, smooth and silent as if floating over ice. Snow pressed thick against the windows, the streetlights dissolving into molten halos beyond the misted glass. I sat still, my hands resting on my lap, palms still cold. Jack did not speak for several minutes. The space between us felt dense, heavy with things unsaid. I tried not to look at him, yet I could not escape the sense of being watched. When I finally glanced over, his eyes were already waiting, unmoving, unashamed, studying me with a quiet intensity that made me forget how to blink. "You do not trust strangers," he spoke softly, nearly a whisper, yet his words rang clearly through the enclosed space. I blinked, startled, then offered a thin smile. Who would trust them? He tilted his head, one leg crossed over the other, one hand resting along the seat. That answer did not come from reason. It came from fear. He did not ask, he stated, as if he had read something in my gaze I had not meant to show. I turned toward the window, trying to hide the feeling of being exposed. A few seconds passed before he continued. "Your father is gone." His voice held no curiosity, only something that felt almost sorrowful. I turned back to him, my eyes meeting his, and for the first time I saw more than coldness in them. "My mother is gone too. Last year," I admitted softly. He nodded, as though confirming something he had known already. I did not understand why I told him that. I was not the kind to open up easily, especially not to a man who had known my name for less than an hour. But with Jack, boundaries blurred, rules dissolved. He watched me for a moment longer, then looked away. I heard the faintest sigh escape him, carrying with it an old kind of weariness. "I lost my mother." The short sentence came without details, but beneath it I sensed a wound that had never healed. I did not ask anything further. A gentle, unexpected silence settled between us, not awkward, not strained, just two people carrying their losses, sitting side by side while the world drifted quietly past. I did not know what he did for a living. I did not ask. But deep beneath the perfect tailoring of his coat, I sensed a world full of things one should never know, and instead of fear, I found myself drawn in. "Have you ever run away, Grace?" His sudden question startled me. I turned to him, confused. "What do you mean? Run from what? From yourself? From reality? From everything that makes you feel like you are no longer you?" I stared at him for a long moment, unable to speak, because I knew if I opened my mouth I could not lie, and perhaps he did not need my answer. The car turned onto a tree-lined road where the streetlights no longer reached. I straightened in my seat, glancing around in uncertainty. This was not the way to my home. I opened my mouth to speak, but he had already turned to me, his voice even and soft as wind gliding over a still lake. "You cannot go home tonight. It is not safe." I meant to protest, but before I could, the car slowed in front of large iron gates flanked by tall fencing swallowed in darkness. I said nothing. I simply sat there, heart pounding, feeling as though I had stepped up to a threshold that, once crossed, would not allow me to return. And the most frightening thing was, I was not sure I wanted to. The heavy iron gates opened slowly, the scrape of metal echoing through the bitter night, and the car glided forward along a long stone path flanked by rows of bare black oak trees casting skeletal shadows across the snow-covered ground. I turned to look behind us, the city lights now nothing more than a faint smear along the horizon, distant and blurred like an old memory. I had no idea where we were, but every instinct in me whispered that this was not a place meant for wanderers. The car rounded a bend, and a mansion emerged before my eyes, exuding a radiance that was not the glitter of ordinary wealth, but the quiet, fortified power hidden behind marble and frosted glass. Warm golden light spilled from tall windows, making the facade appear as though it breathed. I swallowed hard, my lips dry, as the car slowed before the steps. The door was opened from the outside by a man in a dark overcoat whose face held no expression and needed no introduction. Jack stepped out first, looked back at me, and said nothing, yet his gaze was command enough that I had no choice but to follow. My heels clicked against the cold stone, each step sounding like a knock on the door of fate. When we entered the grand foyer, I had to steady my breath. The ceiling rose impossibly high, a heavy crystal chandelier hanging like a constellation, and the white marble floors streaked with gray veins shone with an icy glow. Twin staircases curled upward toward the second floor, where the darkened corridor was muffled by deep wine-colored velvet. The air carried the scent of old wood, leather, and something warm and indistinct that I could not name. A middle-aged woman stepped out from the left wing, small in stature, her hair neatly pinned, her face kind yet stern. She bowed her head politely to Jack before turning her assessing gaze toward me, searching for something I did not understand. "This is Marisol," Jack said, his eyes still fixed on me. "She will take care of you tonight." I turned toward him, wanting to ask a question, any question, but he was already walking deeper into the house without looking back. Marisol gestured gently, and I followed her down a long hallway that led to a room at the very end. When she opened the door, I froze. A large bedroom stretched before me, French windows overlooking a snow-covered garden, a fire crackling in the fireplace, a wide bed dressed in clean white linen, a silk nightdress folded neatly atop it, soft fur slippers on the floor, and another set of clothes hanging on a wooden rack. On the table, a tray of hot tea and small pastries waited. No one asked if I was hungry. No one asked what I needed. Everything had been prepared, so meticulously it was almost frightening. Marisol said quietly that the bathroom was to the left and the water had been warmed. I nodded, drifting like a sleepwalker. When she left and the door clicked shut, I stood alone in that unfamiliar room, my mind filled with questions, yet unable to shape any of them into words. I should have been afraid. I should have found a way to leave, but instead I stood there for a long time, staring into the tall mirror at the head of the bed, seeing myself in a place that did not belong to me, and strangely, not wanting to return to the place that used to be home. I did not know who Jack Remington was out in the world, but in this house he was everything. And somehow, without warning, he had chosen to let me exist in that world. I walked to the window and gazed out at the garden, where snow continued to fall in steady, quiet flakes, untouched by noise or chaos. I pressed my hand to the cold glass, and for the first time in many months my heart did not feel entirely hollow. Something was stirring slowly, faintly like a small seed pushing up through frozen soil. I did not know whether it was hope or the first step into a place where there was no turning back, but I knew one thing with absolute clarity. Tonight, I had not gone home. And perhaps I would never go home again. I woke in the middle of the night, not from a nightmare or a sound, but from the unmistakable sense of being watched. When I opened my eyes, the soft glow of a type lamp blurred the edges of the room, and Jack sat in the armchair near the window, one hand on the armrest, the other holding a glass of whiskey that shimmered amber in the dim light. His eyes remained fixed on me, quiet and unreadable. He did not speak at first, and I did not rush to ask. The room was so still I could hear the distant chime of a grandfather clock somewhere in the house, like a slow heartbeat. At last he spoke, his voice lower and rougher than usual, as if he had been thinking for a long time before deciding to say the words aloud. "Tonight, someone tried to poison me." His statement made me bolt upright, my heart tightening, my throat going dry. I did not know how to react, or even if I had heard him correctly. Jack took a slow sip of whiskey, then set the glass on the small table beside him. "The glass you poured water beside," he said steadily, each word precise, his gaze still locked on mine. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. I remembered the moment perfectly. Table 9. The glass, the heavy water carafe, the single drop that had splashed onto the table. I had done nothing wrong. I had brought nothing but water. I had only done my job. He nodded lightly, as if reading the panic rising in my eyes. "He knew you had nothing to do with it. It was not your fault, but you stood too close for the people behind this to believe you saw nothing, and that makes you a thorn in their side." A chill raced down my spine despite the fire still burning hot behind me. My fingers gripped the edge of the blanket, my voice unsteady. "Why me? I am just a waitress. I have nothing to hide." He rose, moving slowly toward me, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the wooden floor. He stopped at the foot of the bed, not sitting, not bending, just looking down at me with an expression carrying something both sad and stern. Because you walked in at the precise moment you should not have been there. You appeared when no one was allowed near that place. You saw things you should not have seen, even if you did not recognize them, and more than that. He paused, his gaze tightening. I am not sure you would be safe if you went back to the city. I heard every word, and deep inside me something began to rise, something I did not want to name. It was not fear. It was the bitter realization that I had been drawn into something larger, darker, and far deeper than I understood. I shook my head, but I do not know anything. I am just an outsider. I only want to go home, to continue my life. Jack sat on the edge of the bed, the distance between us shrinking to the space of a breath. You do not have a home anymore, Grace. These people do not spare those they believe might reveal anything. Whether you know something or not no longer matters. I looked at him, my eyes bright with confusion. Then, am I a hostage? He shook his head, his gaze never leaving mine, and for the first time since this night began, an unexpected gentleness softened. His features, not a hostage, someone who needs protection. A quiet pause settled between us. I heard the wind outside, the crackle of wood in the fireplace, the rush of my own heartbeat pressing against my ribs. I knew I had no choice. But what surprised me was that somewhere inside all the confusion, a small part of me was calming. Not because of his explanation, but because of his eyes, because of the man sitting before me. I did not know how long I would stay here, or what would happen next. But in this moment, right now, I knew one thing with certainty. I did not want to go back, not because I was afraid, but because for the first time after so much loss, someone had decided that my existence was something worth keeping. I could not sleep. The room was spacious, the blanket soft and heavy, the fireplace warm, yet none of that brought me comfort. Instead, it made me feel even more adrift, as though I were living inside a dream too unreal to trust. I sat up in the middle of the night, quietly slipped on the silk robe, and stepped out into the hallway. The mansion was steeped in silence, the dim wall sconces casting a muted glow that made everything appear suspended in another dimension. I walked barefoot, each step careful, afraid to disturb the fragile stillness enveloping the place. I did not know what I was looking for. Perhaps an exit. Perhaps a door that would lead me back to the life I used to know. Or perhaps simply the feeling of deciding for myself where to go. I stopped before a wide window overlooking the back garden, where snow continued falling in a thick white haze. Far beyond the fence, faint lights glowed, washing the garden in a pale mist. I wondered if anyone out there realized I was missing. Whether Lily had noticed I had not come home. Whether she had called the police. Whether anyone thought I had been taken, or merely assumed I was a young woman who wandered off after a long shift. I placed a hand over my chest, feeling my heartbeat quicken. A suffocating pressure rose inside me, a wave that threatened to drown what little reason I still clung to. I could not stay here. I could not accept everything simply because someone had told me I needed protection. I was not used to being controlled, not used to someone deciding where I should be, how long I should remain, or what my life was allowed to look like. I turned and hurried down the main foyer, scanning for a way out. The large wooden doors were locked tight, no sign of a key. I pressed gently, but nothing moved. I continued to the back of the house, found a smaller door that led to the garden, also locked. Every door, every path was restricted, as though the house itself were a beautiful velvet-lined cage. Panic began to creep in. My heart pounded, my palms damp with cold sweat. I did not know whether this was protection or imprisonment. I slid down the wall, knees pulled to my chest, hands over my head, tears slipping down without my noticing. I did not want to cry, did not want to appear fragile, but loneliness hit me like a storm I no longer had the strength to withstand. I had been trying for so long to stand firm, to need no one, to be strong in the way a child forced to grow up too soon learns to be. And now, with someone stepping into my life claiming to shield me, I felt as though pieces of myself were slipping away. I heard footsteps behind me. Not fast, not urgent, simply the steady echo of shoes on hardwood like the ticking of a clock counting down. Jack stood there, not surprised, not angry, simply watching me as if he had known I would not stay still. "Where do you want to go?" he asked softly. I lifted my head, tears clinging to my cheeks, my voice cracking under the weight of my fear. "I want to go home. I cannot stay here like someone being kept without a say. This was not my choice." He stepped closer, lowering himself to sit across from me, not touching, not pulling, simply present. "Grace, if there were a way to let you leave, without putting you in danger, do you think I would stop you?" I looked at him with hurt shining in my eyes. "Then what am I now? Someone kept here until things calm down out there? Or prey hidden away from those who are hunting?" He did not answer right away. His gaze drifted downward, as though he were speaking to something he had carried inside for a very long time. "You are the first person who looked at me without fear, at least in the beginning. The first person who sat beside me without needing to know who I was. You are not prey. You are someone I cannot afford to lose." I stayed silent. His words did not ease my heart. They only made everything more tangled, because for the first time in my life, I could not name what I was feeling. Fear, anger, or something far more dangerous. Something that, if allowed to grow, would leave no room to retreat. The first morning in the mansion began without car horns, without an alarm, without the sound of Lily clattering around our cramped kitchen making coffee, only the soft chirping of birds that seemed to drift in from another world entirely. I opened my eyes and took a few seconds to remember where I was. Then the heaviness returned, settling over my chest like a veil of fog. Pale morning light seeped through the curtains, thin and cold. I rose from bed, feet sinking into carpet so soft it felt numb. On the sofa sat a fresh set of clothes, a pale gray knit dress, a soft coat, a light scarf. No one knocked, no one called for me, yet everything had been prepared. I dressed, brushed my hair, and stepped into the hallway, still as silent as if no one lived here. I did not know where I was allowed to go, what boundaries would appear if I crossed the wrong line, but my feet carried me downstairs, through the foyer, and into a wide room on the right. It was a dining room, a long table centered beneath neat rows of glassware and white linen. The scent of baked bread and coffee lingered warmly in the air. Marisol stood near the fireplace with a cup of tea in hand. When she saw me, she nodded, her gaze no longer searching but still impeccably polite. "Good morning, Grace." I nodded back, hesitating. "Can I help with anything?" She shook her head gently, motioned for me to sit, and poured coffee into a cup she placed before me. I looked around, noticing Jack was absent. "He left early," Marisol said, as though reading my thoughts. "He has some meetings, but if you need anything, you may ask me or Reese." I tilted my head at the unfamiliar name. "Who is Reese?" The answer came when a man entered the room, tall, dark-skinned, hair cropped short, eyes sharp as blades. Dressed entirely in black, he stood with rigid posture like a silent guardian. Marisol introduced him. "Reese is responsible for security here." I nodded, trying not to react. He did not smile or greet me, only dipped his head once and stood in the corner, presence steady and watchful. I drank the coffee and ate a few bites of pastry, though my sense of taste felt muted, whether from nerves or from having forgotten what it felt like to savor anything. When I rose to leave the table, Reese stepped forward once, his voice low and firm. "If you wish to take a walk, stay within the grounds of the estate. The front gate is monitored, and the woods behind the house are not safe." I froze. His tone was not threatening, yet it chilled me all the same. I nodded without speaking and stepped outside into the front garden, feeling as though every step I took was observed. There were no visible cameras, but I knew I was being watched. The tall windows, the shadowed hallways, the immaculate corners, they were all places where unseen eyes could linger. I wandered past flower beds withered by winter, fingertips brushing the cold wooden fence. No sound filled the air except the wind whispering through bare branches. I did not know whether this was care or confinement. I did not know whether Reese was a protector or a guard, but I knew with absolute certainty that every step was noted, every movement contained. When I returned inside, I found Marisol arranging books on a shelf, her hands graceful and precise. I watched her for a moment before asking, "How long have you worked here?" She smiled softly, without looking up. "Nearly 20 years. I cared for Jack's mother before she passed. She was a remarkable woman." Her answer stunned me. There was something sorrowful in her tone, a fragment of memory still lingering like dust in sunlight. I did not ask anything more. I retreated to my room and closed the door gently behind me. The feeling of being watched remained, clinging to me like a thin veil of smoke, weaving into the cracks of my thoughts. I sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by questions with no answers. In this place, I did not know who was friend, who was simply watching, or who waited for me to misstep. But I knew one thing with unsettling clarity. From this moment on, my existence no longer belonged solely to me. I did not expect to see Jack again that morning, at least not so soon. After returning to my room, I tried reading a few pages of a book to quiet the shapeless anxiety lingering in my chest, but not a single word stayed with me. When Marisol knocked and invited me down for breakfast, I simply nodded and followed her, still unable to shake the faint sense of being watched that clung to the house like a thin veil of fog. The dining room had already been set, morning light spilling through the large window and warming the space, though the air remained still, as if waiting for something unspoken. When I stepped inside, Jack was already seated at the head of the table. He wore a pale gray shirt, no tie, sleeves rolled neatly to his elbows, the veins at his wrist visible beneath the simple black watch. His gaze settled on me the moment I entered, not in surprise or urgency, but as though he had known the exact minute I would appear. I sat in the familiar place to his right, careful and measured, aware that every movement felt examined. Marisol brought out 2 simple plates of breakfast, fried eggs, toasted bread, and fruit. No other staff, only the 3 of us. I bent over my plate, trying to hide my unease, when Jack's voice rose, gentle yet enough to make me lift my head. "You are like your mother." I froze, my fork suspended in midair. He continued, neither quick nor slow, not in appearance, but in the way you look at things, as if you are trying to find a place to stand without needing anyone to see you. I swallowed, my throat tight. "What do you know about my mother?" Jack set down his cup of coffee, his eyes softening. He did not look at me when he spoke, but at the window where the snow still clung to the sill. "Your mother once worked as a nurse at a community clinic in the East Bronx. When I was injured for the first time, she stitched me up. She did not ask questions, did not show fear, only did her job and sent me out the door as if I were any other patient." I stared at him, unable to believe what I was hearing. "My mother never told me that." Jack turned his gaze back to me, and this time there was something so deep in his expression, I could not guess the thoughts behind it, because she did not want you to know. She said that if she could keep you away from the dark, she would do it at any cost. My chest tightened sharply. Memories of my mother flooded me like a sudden wave, so forceful it nearly brought me to tears. She had always worked 2 jobs, always stayed up late, always quiet. I knew she struggled, but I never asked more, because she always smiled and said everything was fine. I never imagined she had touched any part of Jack's world. He went on, his voice low and steady. "After that day, I went back to see her. Not to thank her, but to understand why she had not been afraid. She only looked at me and said one thing. Some people spend their whole lives avoiding danger, and some accept it in order to protect others. I never forgot that." I lowered my head, clasping my hands beneath the table. A tight ache gathered in my throat, a mix of sorrow and shame. I never knew my mother had been so brave. I had always thought she was fragile because she sacrificed so much to care for me, turned down every chance to rest or step forward in life. Now I understood her strength had simply taken a shape I had never recognized. Jack continued quietly. "She told me that if you ever met me someday, you should forgive me if I was not a good man, because even the most lost souls can become a refuge for someone else." I could not speak. I sat there in silence, tears slipping down without my noticing. For a moment, the distance between us was no longer fear or suspicion, but a thin thread woven from memories of a woman who had been my entire world and who had left a mark on his. I sat in my room for a long time after breakfast, my heart twisting with every detail Jack had shared about my mother. What he knew, what he remembered, each small piece made her image both painfully near and achingly far. I felt caught between 2 worlds, one made of the truths I had always believed, the other of shadows slowly revealing themselves, piece by piece. I no longer knew which one was real. The phone had been placed on the desk without my noticing. Marisol had brought it, saying only that Jack wanted me to contact anyone who made me feel safe. But when I picked it up, my palms were damp, my heart beat frantic. I dialed Lily's number. One ring, then another, then a third. When she answered, her familiar voice tightened my throat. "Grace? Good Lord, where have you been? I called you all night. You did not come home. You did not text. I thought something happened." I closed my eyes, inhaling deeply, trying to steady my voice. "I am sorry, Lily. I am fine. I just needed some time." I went out of the city, staying with a relative. I stepped away from my phone for a while. "I did not mean to scare you." The silence on the other end was like a crack running through my chest. Lily did not speak for several seconds. Then her voice returned, lower, sharper with suspicion. "What relative?" "You have no one except Aunt Rosie, and she lives all the way in Florida." I bit my lip, feeling my heart splinter. "I know. I do not know how to explain it. It is someone on my father's side, someone I never mentioned because Mom did not want me to stay in touch. But now, everything is a mess." Lily sighed, and I could imagine her frowning, worried and irritated. "You scared me to death, Grace. You should have said something. I thought someone kidnapped you." I let out a small, broken laugh that got stuck in my throat. "I know. I am sorry. I was not thinking clearly. I will text you every day, all right? I just need a few days. Some time to think." The silence stretched again before Lily spoke more softly. "All right. But if 3 days go by and I do not hear from you, I am calling the police. I do not care who this relative is. You cannot disappear like this. Do you understand?" I nodded, then realized she could not see, and whispered, "I understand. Thank you, Lily. You are the only person I trust." After ending the call, I sat there with the phone still in my hand, my heart strangely hollow. I had lied to my closest friend. A lie with no beginning or end, fragile enough to crumble with one simple call for confirmation. But what hurt most was how easily it had come out of my mouth. What was I doing? Where was I? Why was I sitting in a mansion lying to someone I loved when no one had forced me outright? I grabbed my head, fingers tangling in my hair, wanting to scream but unable to. I was slipping away from myself, each word I spoke, each choice I made no longer matching who I really was. Everything had become a series of survival reflexes, decisions shaped by circumstances I could not control. I no longer knew what was right or wrong. I did not know who I was living for, and the worst part was, I did not know if I even wanted to go back. The air in the room felt thick, time moving slow enough to choke me. I broke down, this time unable to stop the tears. I cried for everything I had lost, for my mother, for the truth hidden from me, for Lily, and for the version of myself I used to be. I had once believed I knew exactly what I wanted. Now I was no longer sure. In this unfamiliar house, between these silent walls, I began to feel myself unraveling, little by little, in the quiet, with no one there to see. I did not know when I had drifted to sleep on the sofa. All I remembered was that the late afternoon light had softened by the time I opened my eyes, my body so exhausted I could no longer tell how much time had passed. My mind was empty, my eyelids still burning from tears. The room rested in a pale golden glow, so quiet that I almost didn't notice Jack standing there, as if he had been watching me for much longer than I realized. He wasn't dressed in his usual business attire, but in a dark knit sweater and khaki pants, his hair slightly tousled, his eyes fixed on me with a gaze that felt impossibly steady. I pushed myself upright, fumbling as I tried to smooth my hair, but he shook his head gently, lifting a hand to tell me I didn't need to say anything. He walked closer and settled into the chair across from me, keeping a distance that felt safe yet close enough that I could not pretend he wasn't there. "Grace, you are not the only one who carries pain inside." His voice wasn't loud, but it echoed in the stillness. I lifted my eyes to him, my gaze still rimmed with red. Jack reached into his inner pocket and pulled out a small, worn photograph, placing it on the table between us. I picked it up, studying it carefully before freezing. A woman with thick dark hair, sad brown eyes, and a gentle smile. I didn't need to ask. I had already seen those eyes in Jack. "Your mother." He nodded when he saw my eyes land on the picture. "She died when he was 17. Not from illness, not from an accident, but from being killed." The words fell between us like a stone breaking the surface of a still pond, tightening something deep in my chest. My fingers trembled as I held the photo. Why? Jack did not look at me. His gaze drifted toward the window. She had tried to leave the world he was born into, a world where everything had a price, even life itself. But no one leaves easily. One night, after submitting her resignation to an organization secretly controlled by his father, she was followed. When she stepped out of the building, only a few steps from her car, a vehicle hit her head-on. They called it an accident. No one was arrested. No one was held accountable. My hands shook harder with every word he spoke. "And you, back then?" Jack nodded, his eyes still fixed on the window pane. "I was standing a short distance away. I saw everything. And I couldn't do anything." I swallowed painfully, my lungs tightening as if the air had thinned. Losing a mother was already a wound. Watching it happen and being powerless must have been agony multiplied 1,000 times. I whispered, "I'm sorry." He looked at me, and for the first time, the strength I always saw in his eyes gave way to a sorrow that felt painfully human. She was the only one who taught me that kindness isn't weakness. She said that even those born in the dark have the right to choose the light, and if they cannot choose it for themselves, they can still choose it to protect someone else. I couldn't save her. But if I ever have the chance again, I will not stand still. He held my gaze for a long, unbroken moment, as if the promise wasn't just for himself but somehow also for me. "Grace, when you walked in that night, in that unfamiliar black dress, with eyes exhausted yet honest, I saw my mother. Not in how you looked, but in the way you kept living even though life had been merciless. I didn't plan to keep you here at first. But then I realized that to let you walk away, I might have to stand there and watch another woman disappear. And I cannot bear that again." I sat frozen, and after a long time, I reached out and placed my hand lightly on the photograph. Among all the things I did not understand in this house, among all the layers of protection and secrets, there was one truth that needed no explanation. Jack's pain was real, and his love for his mother was real. And even if I did not yet know what I meant in his world, I understood one thing with absolute clarity after that moment. I was no longer just someone who happened to appear in his life. I was someone he chose to protect, not out of obligation, but because loss had shaped him in ways that would never let him walk away again. After that afternoon, the air between us no longer felt like a fragile thread about to snap. There was still distance, still long stretches of silence, but something inside those silences had shifted. I began noticing small details about him. The way he poured coffee without a word, but never forgot to pour mine first. The way he quietly watched whenever I stepped into the garden but didn't follow, as if he wanted to give me space to breathe yet stay close enough that I would not feel alone. I could not pinpoint when my own eyes began lingering on him a little longer, or when I started noticing the callous spots on his thumb and forefinger marks that didn't belong to a man who only issued commands. Once, I passed by his study. The door was half open, and inside he was reading under the soft glow of a lamp, a pair of thin-framed glasses resting on his nose. The light touched only half of his face, softening the sharp edges I had memorized during those first nights. He didn't look like an untouchable symbol of power, nor the man who had held me in place under the guise of protection. He looked like someone who had endured so much that silence had become his only way of staying whole. That night, I couldn't sleep. Memories of my mother, peeled open by his stories, made my heart ache. I went downstairs, intending only to make tea, but when I walked past the living room, the fire was still burning. Jack sat by it, legs stretched out, a book open in his hand. He looked up when he saw me, unsurprised, and motioned for me to come closer. I sat down one seat away from him. We didn't speak for a while. It was just the two of us and the soft crackling of the flames. The quiet was so complete that even our breaths felt loud. Finally, I asked, so softly I wasn't sure he heard, "Do you ever regret keeping me here?" He turned to me, and in that moment, his eyes were no longer cold. "No. If I had to do it again, I would still keep you here." My heart thudded painfully. I didn't know what answer I expected, but it wasn't that. I turned toward the fire to hide the heat rising to my face. I didn't understand why, but his words, simple as they were, felt like they cracked something open inside me. We fell, silent again. Then, almost without thinking, I let my head rest on his shoulder. No planning, no fear, just the instinct of a tired soul seeking somewhere steady to lean, and he didn't move away. He didn't stiffen. He simply tilted his head slightly, letting it rest against my hair, his breath brushing my forehead, warm and painfully gentle. For the first time in a very long while, I felt safe. Not because I was being protected, but because I didn't have to brace myself anymore. In those few minutes, I wasn't the girl running from a hard life, nor the child who lost her mother, nor the woman kept in a strange mansion. I was simply someone who had let her guard slip, just enough to feel something tender and fragile and achingly real. When I finally stood up to return to my room, he didn't stop me. But his eyes followed me all the way to the stairs, and when I lay in bed, the warmth from his shoulder still lingering on my skin, I knew I had crossed a line. No one had forced me to come closer. No one told me that place was safe, but I had stepped toward him anyway, willingly, without fear. And for the first time, I found myself wondering, if things were different, if danger vanished and the shadows receded, would I choose to stay? Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. The next morning, when I woke up, a small ivory-colored box sat neatly on the vanity near the window, beside a handwritten card inked in deep brown. The brief message rose from the paper like a whisper. Tonight, 7 o'clock, downstairs. There was no signature, but I knew it was from Jack. I opened the box, and inside lay a wine-colored silk dress, light as breath, smooth as running water under my fingertips. It had been chosen with deliberate care, not ostentatious, yet elegant and strangely perfect in size. I stared at it for a long moment, then pressed my hand to my chest, where my heart was beating faster than usual. I didn't see Jack at all that day. Marisol passed by quietly, now and then to ask if I needed anything, and Reese stood where he always stood, silent and unmoving like part of the house itself. When the clock struck 7:15, I stood before the mirror one last time, adjusting the thin strap of the dress before walking down the staircase. The lights in the foyer glowed softly, rising from warm golden sconces, creating an unexpected sense of comfort. Jack was standing by the fireplace, his back toward me, dressed in a black suit that fit his tall frame with effortless precision, the collar of his shirt slightly open, no tie. When he turned, his gaze rested on me for so long that I felt rooted to the floor. That look wasn't like the ones before. It held no caution, no scrutiny, but a recognition gentle, familiar as if he were seeing me for who I truly was, not because of circumstance, but because of something in me he had been waiting to see. "You look beautiful," he said it softly, and all I could do was nod, because if I opened my mouth, I feared my voice would tremble. He held out his hand, and I stepped forward, placing mine in his. His hand was warm and steady as he led me into the dining room, where a dinner had been prepared. There was no chef, no server, only a small round table set for two, candlelight flickering and red wine catching the glow. We ate mostly in silence, but it was a silence that felt easy, unburdened, as if each moment were weaving something delicate, yet undeniably real between us. After dessert, Jack rose, walked toward me, and offered his hand again. I took it without thinking. He led me to the small music room at the end of the hallway, where soft lights washed over polished wooden floors, and an old speaker played warm, low jazz. He placed his hand on my waist. I rested mine on his shoulder, and the space between us dissolved until only the music remained. We turned slowly in the room, breath mingling, heartbeats falling into rhythm with the soft bass. I looked up at him and found his eyes already on me, unblinking. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. One slight tilt of his head, one slowed step, and then his lips brushed mine. The kiss was not rushed, not dramatic, but so tender it sent tremors through me. I felt the restraint in him, as if he feared he might break me if he pressed too hard. But it was that very gentleness that made resistance impossible. I closed my eyes and let myself sink into a moment I knew I would never forget. When we parted, neither of us spoke. We simply stood there, looking at each other, and in his gaze, I did not see the shadows that had haunted him. I saw myself, reflected more clearly than I ever had been before. And in that moment I understood. Every wall I had built around myself, he had reached not by force, but by truth, by pain, by a patience and tenderness I never imagined could come from a man like him, and by that first kiss that made me realize I no longer wanted to run. I couldn't sleep after that night, but not because of fear or worry like those first nights in the mansion. This time it was because my heart kept echoing with an unfamiliar rhythm, the moments between Jack and me lingering in the air as if they refused to fade. I sat by the window, looking out at the dim garden where only a few lights glimmered faintly from the house. Everything was so quiet I could hear my own breathing. I remembered Jack's gaze after the kiss, how he hadn't said anything yet had shown me everything he had never dared voice. He didn't pressure me. He didn't ask how I felt. He didn't use words to bind me to him. But that was exactly what made my heart feel tangled and unsteady. I was afraid I was stepping too deeply into a world I never imagined existed. Afraid that what I felt for him was no longer simple sympathy or gratitude, but something bigger. Something that could cost me my sense of direction. I feared that if I let myself love him, there would be no turning back. But the frightening part, was that I no longer wanted to turn back. The next morning, I met Jack in the garden behind the house, where the rose bushes still held remnants of early dew. He wore a dark sweater, hands in his pockets, quiet as always. I walked slowly toward him, my heart pounding with painful clarity. He turned, gave me a faint greeting that barely formed into words. Standing before him, I clenched my hands to keep my voice steady. "I don't know what I'm doing." The words came out soft but honest. He waited in silence for me to continue. "I'm scared. Everything feels too real, too fast. I don't know what I should trust, whether I should stay or leave." But I lifted my head, meeting his eyes so he would understand that what I was about to say was not born of impulse. "I don't want to leave. I've thought a lot about my mother, about this place, about you. And I realized that despite the fear, the conflict, the wound still inside me, the only thing I am certain of is that I don't want to go back to my old life as if none of this ever happened." Jack didn't answer right away. He looked at me for a long time, then gently touched my cheek, as if confirming I was real. His voice was low when he asked, "Are you sure? Because I will never keep you here if there is hesitation in you." I shook my head slightly, a faint, tired smile forming. "I'm not sure what will happen next, but I'm sure if I turn away now, I'll regret it for the rest of my life." He pulled me into his arms, holding me just firmly enough that I felt I belonged there. No grand words, no extravagant promises, just the two of us standing in a quiet garden, silently agreeing that from this moment on, neither of us would stand alone. I leaned into his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart, his warmth filling the hollow spaces I had guarded for so long. And I knew that even though uncertainty still lay ahead, though shadows still lingered somewhere beyond the garden walls, I had found something unmistakable amid the turmoil. I chose to stay, not out of fear, not because I was kept here, but because in this place, beside this man, I had found something I once believed was not meant for me: peace, understanding, and a love quietly growing with every silent day. That afternoon, after our conversation in the garden, Jack told me to follow him down to the eastern basement of the mansion, a place I had never set foot in since arriving. The hallway was carpeted thickly, flanked by old stone walls, softened by rows of warm yellow sconces spaced with precise symmetry. His hand held mine the entire way, and though he said nothing, something in his eyes made it clear this was not a casual stroll. When the large, dark wood door appeared before us, he paused and drew from his pocket a ring of keys, not ordinary keys, but numbered ones, heavy and finely crafted. He unlocked the door, and it opened with a surprising gentleness. Inside was not a wine cellar or a room of antiques as I had imagined, but a quiet, minimal space. A long table, several chairs, a filing cabinet, and a vault built into the wall, half hidden behind a shifted painting. Jack led me to the vault and slipped a thin, cold metal key from his inner pocket. He placed it in my hand, his eyes never leaving my face. "This is the master key to this safe." His voice was soft, and I looked down at the small object resting in my palm, as if it were the most dangerous thing I had ever held. "What's inside?" I whispered. "Documents, cash, contracts. A few things capable of destroying or protecting anyone connected to me." He paused, then added, "And things connected to your mother." I lifted my gaze in shock. "My mother?" He nodded slightly. "She once kept copies of certain files for me. She didn't just save my life medically, she saved it by trusting me. I never told you because I wasn't sure you would want to know. But now, I don't want to hide anything from you." I looked at the key, then back at him, the weight of it growing heavier in my hand. "I don't understand. Why me? Why not give it to Reese, or someone you trust more? Jack stepped closer, his hand resting gently on my shoulder. Because they work for me. But you're the only one with the right to choose me, and the only one I want to choose in return. For an instant, my heart seemed to stop, not because of the trust he offered, but because of what it meant. This was not just a key, it was a decision, a sign that I was no longer standing on the outside, that he was opening the door for me to enter a place where every line that once separated us had begun to blur. I tightened my fingers around the key, eyes stinging. I don't know if I can protect you, or even myself, with whatever is behind this door, but I do know one thing. I don't want anything to happen to you without me knowing. Jack nodded, slow and steady. I don't need you to understand everything right now. I only need you to know that if someday you have to choose, I want you to know you have the right to. He walked to the table, picked up a thin folder, and set it atop the unopened vault. But tonight, you don't need to read anything. You only need to keep the key, not out of duty, but because I trust you. There were no oaths, no signatures, no declarations binding me to him. Only the small key resting in my hand, a silent seal between two people who had endured too much loss to give their trust lightly. When we left the room, I didn't give the key back. I slipped it into the pocket of my coat. And in that moment I understood. Real trust doesn't come from promises. It comes from the courage to place a piece of your soul into someone else's hands and wait to see if they will hold it gently. That night it rained, fine silver threads falling against the roof of the mansion in a soft, ancient murmur. I stood at my window for a long time, the key still cold in my pocket like a reminder that between Jack and me, the hesitancy and the doubt had shifted into something more real, more undeniable. I walked down the dim hallway, my steps carrying me toward his room as if my body knew the way before my mind did. I didn't knock. I stood for a moment, then placed my hand on the doorknob. It wasn't locked. The door opened quietly, letting out the scent of wood and faint tobacco, the warm glow from a single lamp softening the corners of the room against the chill outside. Jack sat on a chair, his shirt open at the collar, sleeves rolled up, a book half read in his hand. His eyes lifted from the page the moment he noticed me. He didn't ask a question, he simply set the book down and stood. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me. My heart beat loud as a clock in the stillness. I approached him, meeting his gaze without defense, without distance. I'm not here because I'm curious, or because I need answers. I'm here because I cannot sleep without saying this. Jack didn't look away, as if blinking might mean missing something essential. I breathed in deeply, my heart trembling. I love you. The 3 words needed no adornment, no promises, no special moment. They only needed to be spoken at the right time, to the right person. And as I watched his expression shift, softening, deepening, peeling away all the invisible armor he had worn for years, I knew I had spoken them at the only moment that mattered. He moved toward me, slow and sure, his hand brushing my hair back behind my ear, his fingers grazing my skin as though afraid to hurt me. He didn't answer with words. He lowered his head and kissed me, no hesitation now, no restraint. That kiss carried everything unspoken between us, born from pain, trust, sleepless nights, and the quiet exchange of a key that meant more than either of us dared admit. I wrapped my arms around his neck, feeling his body draw close to mine, strong and warm, as though every fractured part of me had finally found a place to mend. We didn't speak as he lifted me, carefully, as if I were something fragile he had guarded for a long time. The air between us thickened with emotions I couldn't name: desire, steadiness, tenderness, intensity. Each touch from him was an unspoken vow, that he loved me too in his own way, without noise, without justification, but deeply enough to make me feel as if there were only one place I truly belonged. Later, when we lay together, I rested my head on his shoulder, his hand finding mine and holding it gently. He didn't say he loved me, not right away, but the way he pulled me close, the kiss he pressed onto my forehead in the darkness, the way he held me as though letting go would make me disappear, all told me that love doesn't always need words to be real. Outside, the rain kept falling, but inside that room, for the first time since everything began, I felt a peace I had never known. Not because I was being sheltered, but because I had chosen the right person to trust with the softest, most vulnerable part of myself, and he had received it with his whole heart. the days that followed moved with a strangely gentle rhythm, as if time inside the mansion had chosen to slow itself, soften itself, so that two people who had endured too much loss like Jack and me could finally breathe without bracing for impact. We began living as though the distance between us had never existed, as though the early walls and suspicions had been nothing more than shadows passing through. Each morning when I woke, he had already brewed coffee, 2 cups waiting on the kitchen counter near the window. At midday, we walked through the back garden, where the roses bloomed as if they had never known winter. In the evenings, he let me choose a book for us to read together, or we sat side by side revisiting old films we had never had the luxury to watch before. Within that calm, I found myself thinking about things larger than my own life, about my mother, about the women who had slipped into the world of powerful men like Jack and never found a way back out, about girls like the one I once was, quietly drowning in a crowded city, working endlessly just to survive, with no time left to dream. One morning, as we ate breakfast on the veranda with sunlight catching in his hair like faint golden threads, I set down my cup and asked him quietly, if I wanted to do something meaningful not just for myself, but for others, what would you think? Jack lowered his newspaper, his eyes holding mine. What are you thinking about? I took a breath. I want to start a foundation. Something small at first, a program supporting young women, especially those who have been abused, those who have lived through circumstances like my mother. I don't want them to struggle alone in the dark the way she did. I cannot turn back time to help her, but I can do something for the ones still living. He studied me for a long moment, as if he were considering not only my words but the quiet fire behind them. Then he nodded. You have a plan? I told him I had notes, ideas, the name of the foundation, a list of people I wanted to contact, even a possible location for the first office. I would begin by providing temporary housing and psychological counseling. I didn't want a large, polished charity. I wanted something real, intimate, carried by my own name. Jack didn't argue. He simply stood, walked into his office, returned with his laptop, set it in front of me, opened a spreadsheet and a set of documents, and said, "Then start." His voice was gentle but sure. "I'll invest. Not because I love you, but because I believe you know exactly what you're doing, and because I believe this project will not only save others, it will save you." I squeezed his hand, unable to speak. Within the walls that had once sheltered me, I was now being given wings. I began working every day, writing proposals, making calls, building a team. Reese connected me with trustworthy lawyers, while Marisol introduced me to counselors who had spent years working in social service centers. Jack never interfered, but he always listened, always treated my ideas as if I were a real founder, not a broken woman he had pulled from the ruins. And every night, after the work was done, I still rested my head on his shoulder not for protection, but to remind myself that love does not require us to diminish who we are. Sometimes real love is when someone gives you space to become your best self, yet remains beside you, even when your dreams demand your attention. The crystal chandeliers shimmered like morning dew falling from a high ceiling inside the grand hall of the Lexington Hotel, where the first charity gala I initiated was taking place in an atmosphere both elegant and warm. Soft music threaded between round tables draped in white linens, mingling with gentle laughter and the delicate chime of glasses. I stood near the reception table in a fitted deep emerald dress, my hair swept into a neat bun exposing a face lightly, made up but with eyes unmistakably my own, the eyes of Grace, who once collapsed under the weight of life but now stood tall in a place once meant for others. The event, named Second Light, marked not only the beginning of the foundation but a threshold for me personally. In the hall were donors, attorneys, representatives from social organizations, and a few figures from Jack's former world people, who had once seen me as nothing more than a passing name. But tonight I was not a waitress in a borrowed dress. I was the founder, telling my story not to win pity, but to spark hope for the women still trapped in the dark. When I stepped up to the podium, the lights washed over my face, and I faltered for a heartbeat. But then I looked down at the front row where Jack sat watching me, not with pressure, not with expectation, but with the steady presence that let me take a long breath and begin. I spoke about my mother, about the days I had pretended to be fine just to finish a shift, about the nameless fear of being pushed into corners the world pretended not to see. I didn't cry, nor did I seek sympathy. I spoke as if those hardships were the foundation beneath what I was building today. And I spoke of the dream of seeing women rise without asking permission, without trading their dignity just to survive. When I finished, the room was silent for a moment before applause swept through it, wave after wave, not for my speech or its delivery, but because they had seen something real in me, unvarnished, unpolished, unafraid to stand in her own truth. Afterward, an investor approached to ask about a 3-year roadmap. A female attorney who had defended abuse survivors offered her support to train legal advocates for the foundation. Reese stood nearby, watchful, guarding the new world I had stepped into, while Marisol smiled at me for the first time with the warmth of a friend rather than someone assigned to keep an eye on me. When I returned to Jack, he didn't speak at once. He simply held out his hand. I took it, feeling the warmth pulse back into me. "I'm proud of you," he whispered, not loudly, not for anyone else to hear, but enough to make my heart stumble. It wasn't flattery. It was recognition, the kind I had longed for as a child waiting for my mother to come home from her late shift. The night continued, filled with greetings, business cards, and new partnerships. Yet no matter where I stood, my eyes kept drifting back to the man who had given me more than love. He had given me a foundation, but I was the one who stepped into the light. And tonight, in this room of laughter and promise, I understood that my life had entered a new chapter. No more running, no more lowering my head. I was Grace, rewriting my story with hands that once trembled but now knew how to hold the future. The party ended late, guests drifting out beneath the soft glow of lanterns along the terrace, their footsteps fading into the gentle rustle of staff cleaning up, as if an old chapter were quietly closing to make room for something new. Jack drove me home in the familiar car, no driver, only the two of us enclosed in a stillness that felt intimate, his hand resting lightly on my thigh as though holding on to the remnants of the evening. I leaned my head against his shoulder, my bare feet aching but my heart still full. When we reached the mansion, he did not turn off the engine right away but looked at me, his gaze quiet and deep like a lake at night. "Do you know how much you changed the way people see you today?" I gave a small smile and placed my hand over his. "Yes, but what makes me truly happy is that I changed the way I see myself." He said nothing more, only nodded, took the keys, and opened the door for me. As we walked through the small garden behind the house, I noticed paper lanterns lit along the stone path, something that had definitely not been there when we left earlier. My heartbeat quickened, each step carrying a sense of anticipation, as if my body already knew what was coming while my mind struggled to catch up. Jack no longer held my hand but walked beside me in silence. When we reached the open space in the center of the garden where the rose bushes were in full bloom, he stopped. In the middle stood a small wooden table with a gray velvet box on top, surrounded by hundreds of flower petals scattered like fallen rain. I turned to him, my breath catching. The lantern light painted soft shadows across his face, making it almost impossible for me to look away. He took a long breath, stepped closer, then knelt and opened the box to reveal a ring with a diamond that was not large but set within delicate, handcrafted details, classic and understated, just like me. "Grace, you once said you weren't sure what the future would hold, and neither am I. I can't promise that everything will be easy or that storms won't come, but I can promise that from today on, if you agree, I will be the one facing all of it with you. Not as the man who once frightened you, but as the man who loves you with everything left in him. As the man who saw you even before you saw yourself. As the man who will never let go first. Will you marry me?" I don't remember when I began to cry. I only felt my face growing warm, my chest tightening as if every word he spoke had found its way into the deepest part of me. I didn't answer right away, not because I hesitated, but because I wanted to memorize the moment, to fix it in my heart as something sacred. Then I nodded, slowly, as if agreeing with my own soul. "Yes, I will." He rose to his feet, slid the ring onto my hand, and pulled me into his arms. I held him tightly, my arms no longer shaking, no longer uncertain. In that moment, I was not just the woman who loved him. I was the woman who would build a life with him through everything behind us, around us, and ahead of us. In his embrace, I felt something shift irrevocably without needing to be spoken. I had once been the girl standing at the edge of other people's dreams. Now, I was at the center of my own, and I knew that from this night on, we would write the rest of that story together. I often wondered what moment in my life had truly changed everything. Was it that snowy night outside the Valencia restaurant, when I stood waiting behind a door I was forbidden to approach? Or the moment Jack's eyes first met mine, carrying something unexplainable that unsettled me long before I understood it? Or perhaps it was when I realized I could say, "I love you," without fearing the pain that might follow. Today, as I stood by the window of the mansion that had once been a place of fear and was now a home I chose, I saw a reflection of who I once was shimmering in the glass, a thin, weary young woman who believed she deserved only the smallest crumbs life offered. I do not forget her. I do not dismiss her wounds or the tremors that once shaped her. Without those days, there would be no version of me that stands here now, Grace, who is strong, who knows what she desires, who dares to love, to choose, and to keep moving forward. Watching Jack water the roses on the patio, his posture calm and steady, I couldn't help but smile. The man who once frightened me was now the place I returned to whenever I felt unsteady. What we share is not a fairy tale spun from impossible romance. It was built slowly, layer by honest layer, through forgiveness, through arguments, through the hands we reached for each other after every storm. We walked through the darkness not to erase it, but to understand that light is something we must choose and protect every day. I believe everyone reaches a moment when they feel lost, as if they have stumbled into a story that doesn't belong to them. But if you are brave enough to pause, to look inward, and to ask whether you are truly living or merely surviving, you may find a new path waiting, a second chance, a fate you never expected, arriving from the place you least imagined. My story is a journey of pain, forgiveness, and, ultimately, love. And I believe each of us deserves a new chapter, one in which we are defined not by our past but by the strength of the choices we make today. If this story has touched something inside you, please share your thoughts in the comments. I truly want to hear from you, to know whether any part of Grace and Jack's journey reflected something in your own life or in someone you care about. And if you enjoy heartfelt, emotional stories like this, stories filled with human depth and meaning, please subscribe to our channel, like the video, and share it so that these messages can reach even more people. Every day, we hope to bring you content that not only entertains but nourishes the heart, reminding you that no matter how difficult life becomes, love, kindness, and truth always have a place. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. I wish you good health, peaceful days, and a life filled with gentle joy. Goodbye, and we'll see you in the next video.